This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 32nd Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to show that rational people can disagree without being disagreeable. We know from experience that if we hold our convictions lightly while listening to others, we can devote our full attention to different ideas and consider them along with our own. In this way, we all become enlightened and enriched. Our panel today is going to look at the recent Supreme Court ruling in the case of Schuette versus the Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action by Any Means Necessary. In 2006, the voters of Michigan approved a state constitutional amendment which banned the use of racial preferences in public education admissions, government contracts, and government employment. The Sixth Circuit Court ruled that the ban on racial preferences in admissions was unconstitutional. The state of Michigan took it to the Supreme Court, where it was reversed. The Supreme Court essentially said that a state has the right to amend its constitution in cases like this. The opposition says programs like affirmative action should not be shaped by public opinion. Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current Democratic member of the Wadsworth City Council, as well as a lot of other things. On the end is Jerry Ritzman, president and chairman of the board of Ritzman Natural Health Pharmacies, which, by the way, has now grown to 25 locations. Forrest would be proud. Ron, as you know, the recent Supreme Court decision was not about the fairness or effectiveness of using race as a factor in college admissions. It was more about who decides it, the voters or the courts. What are your thoughts?
John, the history of states' rights versus federal rights goes back some distance in our history.
To the very beginning.
Little matter about war between the states was one particular instance. So as a Abraham Lincoln Republican, as a contemporary liberal Democrat, you might expect me to come down strong on the side of federal rights, but that's not necessarily true in all cases, particularly in the case of education, in my mind. I'm convinced in many ways that the federal government, and maybe even the state government, should stay the heck out of education, at least in terms of performance issues. I'm thinking about No Child Left Behind and the Common Core curriculum, and now the present state thing of requiring all third graders to pass a reading proficiency test. However, in this particular case, I would think that the courts, in other words, the government, the federal government, should prevail in this case, because there are wider issues here. This is in matters of what you might call the philosophical approach to things, such things as civil rights. This is too big, too widespread, too universal to be left to the states. I think there has to be a little more uniformity. The one-size-fits-all approach that the federal government seems to take in these things just doesn't work very well. Many unintended consequences. But Lyndon Johnson decided, in promoting, and which was leading into this whole situation, really had the idea of equality of opportunity. And so there have been things bandied about here, and in the cases of Michigan, in the case of, for example, earlier in California, which has had a similar prohibition for some time.
7 states now.
Yeah, 7 states now, but California. I read an op-ed piece by Jana Sotomayor, who's happens to be the president of the college system in California. And she says when this happened, their minority, particularly blacks, but also Latinos and minority people, dropped by more than half. When they couldn't do this. And her point is that it's pretty ridiculous to look at any one aspect of a person to either eliminate it or accept it as the only criterion for college membership. She points out that we're all very diverse individuals, from diverse backgrounds, from different points of view, different backgrounds, different economic situation, and that this diversity in educational matters particularly is extremely beneficial. So I think the Supreme Court dropped the ball here by not really extending this a little bit further. Legally, of course, they're restricted by this. I understand how the law works. You have to address the issue at hand. Mm-hmm. So in this particular case, yeah, that was a legally correct decision, I believe. After all, if we believe that democracy worked, the state of Michigan, the Michigan people voted 58% to put this into force. So mm-hmm. to say, well, it makes no more sense to say, okay, we have to do this to look at this criterion than it does to, we're not allowed to look at this mm-hmm. criterion. Yeah. So I think it's a complex issue, as most are, mm-hmm. and but I'm on the side of in this kind of situation that I think that a uniformity of approach nationwide, from this philosophical and this ethical and this humanitarian in a way, this equal opportunity situation has to come in a unified way and taken out of the hands of the individual states mm-hmm. and make a more uniform system.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I was going to lead off with a question for you, but you may not be prepared for it, so why don't you just share your thoughts?
Well, I listened to the oral arguments. You can go online, Supreme Court, I think it's .gov or whatever, and you can listen to the arguments that have been made in this particular case. I would agree with the first half of Ron's opinion. We need to get the federal government out of education. I guess the question that I would have when you see the participation rates of different minorities drop in public universities, what are some of the causes? Is it just because the person is from a disadvantaged group of people, or is it because they can't get in because of the standards of this college? If an individual takes a standardized test, and all of my kids have gone to college, they take SATs and ACTs, and if they don't qualify and they get turned down to go to a school that they really wanted to, I don't believe that checking off a box on the application should lower that particular standard. So one of the arguments that was put forth to the Supreme Court is, if you check all the boxes, do you really have a more diverse group of people? If let's take for instance Patty. If Patty checks off she's female, and I'm just hypothetical, that she's Native American.
It's true,
hypothetical that I'm female.
No, we know you're female. We know you're female. But hypothetically, you're Native American, and you have some ethnic background, or maybe your race. 3 generations ago, you can check off the box for some other particular preference. Does that now create a situation where Patty gets into the university, but the exact same other student that can't check off those boxes doesn't get in? Mm-hmm. So I look at this as a problem. It is complex, and I'm all for giving people a hand up. But when we start dealing with preferences, where do we stop? Mm-hmm. Do we let people into Harvard? Do we let people into universities that can't qualify, and they don't qualify? And I would say we need to look at that before we start saying that it was just a matter of their race that they didn't get in. If half the people, if minority applications are down and we're not enrolling them, what are the reasons? I don't believe it's just because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background. So it is kind of a prickly issue. I would agree with the Supreme Court. I think we have to get away from these preference-based formulas that the government puts out. I don't think it does anybody any real good. There are marginal cases where people have been given the opportunity. I think Justice Sotomayor pointed to her own instance, in her opinion, that when she wrote in dissent that she doubted if she could get into the university that she went to. For equal opportunity for everybody. I think that application should have, based on the merits of that individual. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's where I sort of come down on this.
Yeah. How about you, Patty? What are you thinking?
I agree a lot with what both of you have said. You know, the problem is that universities presently already are making exceptions for people, and it's not strictly based upon what their score is. If you're a legacy, there's a real good chance you're going to get into that university. If you donate or your family donates a great deal of money to that university, trust me, you'll get into it, whether it be Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever. If you are an athlete and you're the best football player in the country, you'll get into whatever school that you want. And we haven't addressed that. So there are exceptions being made, and what Michigan did was to say, okay, it's all right to still do all of those exceptions, but we won't make an exception for the disadvantaged of our state that are from minority communities that are very bright but have not had the opportunities nor the money to put themselves into a position to be accepted to this school. Since that ruling was passed, I believe, John, in one of the notes you sent to us, it said that 30% of the number of minorities in Michigan have gone down 30%. That was also definitely the case in California.
But the graduation rate went up a little bit.
Now that I haven't seen. So
in California, it went up like 4%.
4%. Well, California,
the minorities graduation.
California actually addressed that because they saw that dropped. Now there's a lot of controversy whether they're using what they call a holistic approach, and I've seen that alluded to, where they're not really giving points, but they're re-examining some of the, I think what they're doing is they're re-examining some of the applications and saying, okay, this kid, you know, really has not had the advantages. Maybe their high school wasn't as good. They didn't offer the AP classes. They didn't offer this, that, or the other thing. And that we can put them into this situation, and we're sure they're going to be successful. So California has been able to deal with it somewhat. Michigan has not. I know that when the Supreme Court ruling was made, it really was not saying that affirmative action is wrong. What they were saying is basically the process whereby the people can vote to make a change in their constitution, which, because it was a constitutional amendment, I believe, that we will approve of, as long as it does not violate federal laws. So, for example, the state of Michigan could not make slavery legal because that would be a violation of the law. But I don't think they're looking at the whole picture and the effect that it has on the college classroom, because I think there's an importance to have an ethnic diversity within a classroom, and of all ethnicities. And I think that you learn, and that's because that's the way the real world is. When you go out in the world, it's not going to be an all-white, male-dominated force. You're going to see everything, and you need to deal with that. To have, to see the other side, to hear the other side, and where people come from, I think is very important in classes. Bryan talked about Justice Sotomayor, and in her dissent, said that she was the, I'll quote it exactly, I am the perfect affirmative action baby. And because she said she did not think, as Bryan's told us, that she would have ever gotten into college had it not been for affirmative action.
The college that she preferred.
Preferred, but as you well know, the college that you prefer, that you choose, can make a big difference where you end up. And in this case, she's now a member of SCOTUS. So I think that's kind of a case for affirmative action.
Yeah.
If I can interject just a minute, Janet Napolitano pointed out that since they're adopting this holistic view in California, that they have had some success, and for the first time this year, the number of Latino students has now larger than the number of Anglos. However, in terms of, there are years when they don't have any black students in the medical schools. There are a drastic decrease of diversity in the graduate programs, so that the people who are being trained to go out and train the others and to contribute in that way to our society, that's not a diverse group in California at the moment. So that's a disadvantage of having this freeze on affirmative action.
Jerry, you're looking very thoughtful.
Yes.
I'm dying to find out what's behind that look.
This is like so many issues, really complicated. And I feel that any individual who has a completely views it one way or the other, no pun intended, black or white, anybody who has opinions like that hasn't thoughtfully considered the issue, because it is difficult. If we look at it on the large-scale basis, as most of the conversation has been today, we can see advantages for affirmative action, and that we need to continue with it in some way. But then when we look at it on a individual basis, if I'm an individual who is equally qualified with another individual, how does that affect me if I'm not the one, or that person is not the one selected for admission because of affirmative action?
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult, and we see, even on other levels where public schools in certain areas are becoming resegregated just by by where the population lives. We see, like in Michigan, without affirmative action in the universities, the level of disadvantaged students, the percentage is going down. But then we have to look at it on the individual level too. So it's difficult and requires a lot of thoughtfulness. One comment was made about the one-size-fits-all approach from the federal government. I don't know, and it just sparked in my mind, the one-size-fits-all approach was not used with the Voting Rights Act, I think, where they had special provisions or special requirements for some of the districts in some of the southern states that they just lifted within the last year. I don't know if an approach like that would work or not.
Interesting.
We all agree that this is very difficult, but I don't know how you make it easy when you try to use racial bias as a remedy for racial bias. Patty, you talked about the legacy candidates and also athletes and so forth, but we don't have a law against that. We do have a law against racial preferences. I mean, the Civil Rights Act of 1964
Right.
specifically ruled them out. In this case, we're only talking about one element of affirmative action, I think, and that is giving people points for their race on college admissions, in addition to the other things. But affirmative action, that phrase was first coined by John Kennedy in '61.
Right.
And that at the time, I don't think that Kennedy was even thinking about preferences of any sort. Affirmative action to him was to make sure that, or to encourage employers to use affirmative action to make sure that equality was achieved.
Exactly.
And that
On the workforce, I
things
think,
like
so.
training the workforce on how to behave toward minorities, training supervisors on how to not be discriminatory, and so affirmative action meant a lot of things, other than the points on an admission scale that we're talking about.
Which is what it's ended up in.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I look at affirmative action as a way to prevent racism, from preventing someone from getting a job, being admitted into college, and so forth. And the concern I have is that a lot of people feel that racism is over. It doesn't exist. And as we all know, it does. I mean, you just look in the news the last few weeks, whether it be Cliven Bundy with his speech, or whether it be Donald Sterling with those comments that he made. They're not necessarily the exception. They're just the ones who happen to get caught on tape saying something that was racist, and that we still do need some of those measures to prevent discrimination, whether it be for college admission, whether it be for employment, and so forth. Now, we still do have our Civil Rights Act, which prevents that, but I'm still concerned that it could be done on the college level, which is basically what we're discussing here, with admissions, if the university so chooses to do so, and it can be hidden. And this is hard because I understand your point. I don't think that, you know, bias should be fought with bias, which is what it seems to be.
Yeah.
But when you talked about the other items that I mentioned as not being against the law, but those are a form of bias as well. And obviously that bias doesn't bother people. You know, we can be biased there, but we're not going to make sure that minorities can be a part of this university. That's where I have a problem. That if you're going to do the one, then get rid of all the others as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the way we use affirmative action right now was probably coined by Lyndon Johnson in a commencement address to Howard University, and I believe it was in about 1965. And he used an analogy that has been repeated over and over again. And that is that it's not fair to have someone in chains for 400 years and bring them up to the starting line and remove the shackles and say, now you're free to compete in this race. That gets used over and over again. But I've often wondered, rather than take the chains off and move the person up to maybe the 30-yard line or give them a 10-second head start, to let them begin to compete and lose, you know, at the very beginning. What would have happened over the last 40 years? Would those folks have learned how to strengthen their character and move ahead?
You know, one of the thoughts that I've had, because I don't think anyone is for discrimination.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone is for keeping any particular group of people down or not allowing them the opportunities to move forward. But if a system could be tweaked or created that would give a person that help that they need along the way, but then as that begins to take root, that it falls away, and that at the end of the day you have someone that's actually standing on their own 2 feet and not expecting that particular preference or that help to continue throughout their whole entire life. And I think that's what's happened here, is that, you know, nobody wants to keep that young man or young woman, no matter where they come from the opportunity to get an education. So let's give them the help. Let's kind of prime that pump and get them to where they need to be. That maybe that extra little booster rocket, so to speak. But once they're on their own, give them, you know, that competition, that character building experience where you don't always win in what you do. And we sort of talked about that. You know, I'd love to have the conversation about college sports, because I think maybe some of my opinions might surprise Patty, but you know, we do. We do in certain areas, our education, higher education, they turn a blind eye to a lot of things. And we got to get rid of those types of things. But it can't always be, you know, a different track for a particular person and another track for another.
But affirmative action only gets that person into school. It gives them that opportunity. They then have to stand on their own 2 feet and make the grades to stay within that university. Now, and if they're not doing that, I am totally opposed to that, because I think you need to stand on your own once you're there. And then, you know, but the thing is, if you don't even give them the opportunity because they have come out of a poorer high school or one that does not provide the educational system that others have, give them the opportunity to get into the program. And if it doesn't work, they will fall.
Exactly. But on the flip side, what we're hearing from universities, public universities, we're spending a lot of our dollars on remedial programs
That's true.
to bring people up to the college level. Now, I agree. We want to give that student the opportunity.
That's for the entire student body, though.
That's white and black.
Yeah, exactly.
Really
but when that individual graduates, now we have an EEOC that is telling a company, a large company, here's the formula that you have to have. If you're going to work for the government, if you're going to accept contracts from the government, you're going to have this diversity manifest in your working, you know, your human resource population. And I don't know if that's really the way, you know, we need to go on.
And I
this.
understand what you're saying.
I think that there's a big sociological factor in this also. How difficult is it for any high school senior to go to a university or college away from home, even if they are, you know, it's a big adjustment. Even if they're part of the majority, it's a huge adjustment. And they can blend in somewhat with people from similar socioeconomic backgrounds and so forth, and in most cases they do that. Yep. How much more difficult is it from somebody from a disadvantaged socioeconomic, racial minority background to go to a place like that, and for them to succeed? There's a lot more involved than just the academic side of it, I think. I think that's huge, because some people may be able to get in there by their SAT, ACT scores and so forth, but can't make that adjustment. And I can empathize with that. Cannot make that adjustment to being put in classrooms and in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week environment with people who they can totally not relate to in their socioeconomic background.
I'll just make it quick. Let me put a plug in for the post-secondary program that our school here in Wadsworth has. Right. My daughter went through the post-secondary program where she went to college half a day. That was for free. She went out to Wayne College. She took credits. Those credits transferred over to the university that she finally went to when she graduated.
And they counted as high school credits.
Counted as high school credits. So there are ways and there are programs in place. I know Akron has one, because I was talking to a young man over there. He's going to graduate from high school and he'll go into college as a junior. Right. As a junior.
Brian, I'm going to correct you slightly.
Yeah.
It was not free. It was of no charge to her.
Right, exactly. That's right. Yeah, it was no charge to her. Right. We paid for it as the taxpayers. Right. Yeah. But what a great springboard for those kids.
That's a state program, actually.
Yeah. You know, so there are ways.
Yeah, there's a growing sentiment. I don't know how rapidly it's growing or how big it is right now on the part of a lot of minorities that resent the idea that they're considered to be affirmative action hires or something, and they're trying to find a way to get around that. Well, thank you very much for another very, very good discussion. And I want you to listen to this quote very carefully, especially you, Ron. All right? This is a quote from John Stuart Mill. "Power may be localized, but knowledge, to be useful, must be centralized. There must be somewhere a focus at which all its scattered rays are collected." Thank you, Mr. Mill.